A short word that's a tall order. Up your game. Up the ante. And if you stumble, you get back up. Up isn't easy, and we ought to know. We're in the business of up. Every day, Delta flies 250,000 people while investing billions improving everything from booking to baggage claim. We're raising the bar on flying, and tomorrow, we will up it yet again.
I think there's no more surprising issue in Southeast Asia, and maybe globally, than what's happened in Burma. And I'll call it Burma because I understand this is on YouTube, so I have to call it Burma. We officially still call it Burma, even though they call it Myanmar. If anyone would have told me when I became the special envoy to Burma about 1.5 years ago that we would have seen the changes that we have seen, I think, I would have laughed at them. Everyone would have been surprised at that. But what we've seen is really the best news story, I think, that's going anywhere in the world. There's a lot not going too well around the world. And yet what's happening in Burma, is remarkable in its speed, in its scope, in its nature, from what was a military dictatorship to what is now a much more open society, and a society that is really eager for American and international engagement. And I think it is the president's trip, which was less than 10 days ago. It's 9 days ago. Feels like 9 months ago to me, but it's about 9 days ago, was a remarkable moment, as was 1 year ago when the Secretary of State went. Because what it represented was, in this term of the pivot, which was, the pivot is about a recognition of the importance of Asia. It was putting the necessary attention and time and resources that Asia requires, because it is of growing importance to the United States, economically, politically, and otherwise. And if you look at the map, you see South Asia, and you see India, and you see Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, most of it anyway, growing quite rapidly, quite dynamically. And the one outlier in that was Burma, in between. Isolating itself, and through our policy also we were isolating it because of its political backwardness. When it comes to China, and whether it's an anti-China thing or directed against China, China has that narrative, and it's unfortunate that that's the narrative. I think in the media that narrative has been picked up. Ambassador Cardin referred to that when he talked about the pivot being largely viewed as somehow mostly a military thing, and probably viewed as an anti-China thing. And in fact, it's not the case for those of us in government, because we need to have a good relationship with China. China's an important market. We're an important market for them. They're an important market for us. Our futures are inextricably linked. The failure of China will cause a huge problem for our economy. The rise of China creates some challenges for us, but those are challenges we will have to manage, and we can do that in a variety of ways. But it's, TPP is meant not to be about China. It's about norms, values, and rules. It's about what should be the standard for free trade agreements going forward. We have our standards. China and maybe some in ASEAN have their standards, and they're different. We have different views, and things are fluid right now because of the rise of major powers around the world that we haven't seen since World War II. So the question is, who are going to shape those rules? What are those rules going to say? What are those norms going to be? And I think the TPP is meant for the United States to have its say about what we view the rules should be, what the norms of free trade ought to be, and have these compete in open session about which one is acceptable to the international community. If China comes around eventually, as other nations are not necessarily eligible today either, perhaps are not ready, but as nations come around, it's wide open for nations to be part of it. So it's not against China, it's for certain norms, for certain values, and for certain rules, as we have traditionally viewed them in the trade sphere.
I'm going to pose one more question, and it's probably a question that a number of people have, and it has to do with Burma. And so I guess this is to Ambassador Mitchell, and that is, what happened? What explains the opening?
Finally.
So in 50 words or less. So what in your view were really, given that you've got this long history with the country, what in your view were the key factors that led to this opening, both external and internal?
You know, what's been remarkable is we've been on this tour for 3 days, and before these 3 days, every single time I talked about this issue, that would be the first question. I hadn't gotten that question in the last 3 days. So finally, someone asked the $64,000 question, why is this happening? I mean, there are a myriad of answers to that. I think the fundamental one is that, and maybe it's the idealistic one, there are lots of different theories, is that, look, these folks looked around the region, looked around ASEAN, and realized they were an embarrassment, they were a pariah, they were falling way behind the trend of the region. And they said, look, this is not the legacy we want to leave. Now, this is not the leader that came before. Even though the guys who are in charge now took off their uniforms and now they're, quote, civilians in government, there was a different senior leader before. And he may not have been ready for this kind of change. But some people think he was ready and that he had put in place over the past 10 years a 7-step program towards democracy. They talked about that openly. No one took him seriously. Everyone thought this was just going to be a big show. They'd have again, they'd take the uniforms off. They'd have a constitution where the military had a privileged position. It would only go so far, and, you know, it would be. But in fact, when the senior leader, Than Shwe, stepped to the side, he seemed to truly step to the side and allow these other guys to come to the fore. My understanding was they had talked about it quietly for years. They were believing there was a better future for the country, that dictatorship didn't work, that isolation didn't work, that alienation from the United States was leaving them vulnerable, frankly, to a China that was not doing them any favors. China was engaging and extracting, and they felt there was a better path, and they were going to test it. And it wasn't certain that it was going to work. They weren't certain they can get the United States to respond the way they wanted the United States to respond. But there were some, I think, courageous folks who had some vision, and they're still in the senior leadership, that are pushing this stuff forward. And that's not to say there aren't people behind the scenes that are uncomfortable with this. There are folks that are uncomfortable with at least the pace of this, and maybe the scope of change, who don't like the fact that their rice bowls are being broken, and that their privileged positions may be threatened, and that perhaps instability can occur. I mean, the fact is, Burma has not proven since independence in the late 40s that it can hold together through almost any means. They had democracy. People remember they had democracy in the 50s. And it was a very fractious democracy. They had civil war all through that period that created instability. It remains to be seen whether diplomacy, democracy, a political process can truly hold this place together, or, as they feared in the 1990s, they will go the way of Bosnia or Yugoslavia and becoming, you know, like Bosnia and Kosovo and the rest of it. So it remains a work in progress. But I think they, you know, and you can say in a cynical way they want to keep, some of these folks want to keep their money that they got, because they have their positions, they're now not being targeted by the international community the way they were before. So the cynical view would be they changed so they can keep what they got. The more idealistic view is they changed because they realized they didn't want to leave the legacy that they were leaving of a basket case of a country that should be the rice bowl of Asia. And then there's the geopolitical, which I think is very serious. These folks are very proud of their sovereignty, very nationalistic, and they were feeling that they were vulnerable to their major power to the north. And I think every Southeast Asian country wants a good relationship with China. They need to have a good relationship with their neighbor. We need that as well. We want that. But they don't want to be simply exposed to that one power. They want an offshore balancer. They want to have an option. They want to have a hedge on this, and that's the United States, that's the Western world, and that's the international community. So I think a combination of all that caused this change. But it wasn't something that just happened overnight. It had been thought about for many years, but it took a change in the leadership to some degree to allow people to come to the fore and realize it.